The man nobody noticed. Some men fight back with fists. Some fight back with lawyers. And some, they fight back with patience, the kind that takes years, and leaves no fingerprints. The man in this story never raised his voice. He never slammed a door or threw accusations across the kitchen table. He just watched, waited, and built something she never saw coming. If you think the quiet ones are the safe ones, stay with me, because this story will make you think again. My name is Dane Carter. I'm 42 years old, and for the past 19 years I have been building two things, a marriage and a company. It turns out I was significantly better at one than the other. I'm a chemist by trade. The kind of man who gets genuinely excited about polymer chains and biodegradable substrates, who talks too much at dinner parties about soil decomposition rates. Not exactly the hero of a romantic story, right? That's what everyone thought. 15 years ago, I developed a packaging material that could dissolve harmlessly into soil within 90 days. It sounds boring. It changed everything. My father-in-law, Richard Drummond, silver-haired, loud-laughing, the kind of man who fills every room he enters, he saw the dollar signs immediately. He brought me into his distribution company, gave me a lab, told me to make magic happen. I did. The patents carry my name. The science is mine. The company, EcoPack Solutions, grew to a valuation of $43 million because of my work. But Richard made sure every investor, every journalist, every employee understood that it was his company. And my wife, Victoria, VP of Marketing, made sure everyone knew she was the real reason it all came together. For years, I let that go. I was a scientist. I didn't need the spotlight. I had my lab. I had my results. I thought I had a family. This particular morning started the way most mornings had lately. I woke at 5:30 to get our 8-year-old son, Dylan, ready for school. He was in the middle of a full-scale dinosaur obsession, telling me, with absolute confidence, that the T-Rex would defeat a blue whale in a fight. I didn't argue. I just tied his sneakers in a double knot, the way he liked, while he talked between spoonfuls of cereal. The front door opened at 6:19. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. The perfume hit first. It wasn't hers. It was something cheaper, sweeter, the kind that clings to hotel bathroom counters. Her heels clicked across the kitchen tile, each footstep a drumbeat of guilt she had no intention of admitting. I kept my eyes on Dylan's laces. "Morning," she said. Her voice was too bright, too practiced. She dropped her clutch on the counter and opened the refrigerator like this was perfectly normal. Like coming home at 6 in the morning was just part of the routine now. "Girls' night ran late again?" I asked, standing and handing Dylan his lunchbox. My voice was flat. Neutral. I'd spent 8 months perfecting that tone. "You know how Laura gets when she's going through stuff," she said, not even looking at me. "We just lost track of time." Laura. Her favorite excuse. Funny thing about Laura, she had posted Instagram stories the previous night from her lake house, 200 miles away. Time-stamped. Verifiable. But I didn't say that. I just watched Victoria run her fingers through her still-styled hair, and I thought, she didn't even bother messing it up for credibility. Dylan kissed her on the cheek before he left. "Bye, Mom. Love you." "Love you too, baby," she said, and for just a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. She looked tired. Not guilty. Just exhausted by the performance. I noticed that, too. After I dropped Dylan at school, I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 10 minutes, engine idling, watching the other parents drive away. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer, Andrew Vance, documents ready for review. Call when you can. I stared at that message, then looked at the photo on my dashboard. Victoria and me, 10 years ago at the beach. She was laughing with her head thrown back, my arm around her shoulders. We looked happy. Maybe we were. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed the cracks forming underneath. The cracks had started becoming visible 3 months ago, not in any dramatic way, but the way a chemist notices things. Through data. Through patterns. I'd been reviewing our accounts one Sunday afternoon, the way I always did. Methodical. Thorough. Our joint savings account, the one we had built together for Dylan's college fund, for our future, showed a balance of $847. It should have shown $319,212. I stared at the screen for a full minute, thinking I had logged into the wrong account. I hadn't. The transaction history told the story in cold, clinical detail. Dozens of transfers, each small enough to avoid triggering fraud alerts. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, spread across 14 months, all flowing to an account I didn't recognize. I did what any chemist would do. I traced the compound back to its source. The receiving account belonged to an LLC registered in Delaware. Blake Hendricks, sole proprietor. Blake Hendricks, director of sales at EcoPack. The man whose cologne I had been smelling on my wife's clothes for the past 8 months. My wife had been funneling $318,000, money I had earned, money we had saved together, into her lover's business account. And that, as terrible as it was not even the worst thing I found that night. 7 years ago, I bought our home outright. $420,000. No mortgage. Cash from my first patent buyout. When the paperwork was being drawn up, Victoria said it made more sense, for tax purposes, to put the deed in her mother Patricia's name. Something about estate planning, capital gains. Her mother's accountant had suggested it. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife. When I pulled up the property records that night, the title showed exactly what she had planned. Patricia Drummond. I had been paying property taxes and insurance on a house I didn't legally own, for 7 years. If we divorced, which I now understood was always part of the eventual plan, I would walk away with nothing. I called Andrew Vance at 11 o'clock that night. He answered on the 3rd ring. "That's financial fraud," he said, after I laid it all out. Possibly wire fraud, depending on how the transfers were structured. "Do you want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "I want everything documented first. Every transaction. Every transfer. Every lie." A pause on his end, and then, already on it. "And Dane, that house situation, we can fight that. You've got proof of payment, 7 years of tax records, insurance documents, maintenance costs. No judge is going to let her mother keep a house you paid for." "Start the paperwork," I said. Quietly. I hung up and looked at our wedding photograph on the desk. Victoria in white, smiling like she had won a prize. Maybe she thought she had. Marry the smart, quiet man. Bleed him dry. Trade him in for someone with more charm and less substance. She forgot one thing. Smart men notice patterns. And I had been noticing hers for months. That evening, Victoria came home at a reasonable hour for once. She made pasta, poured wine, asked Dylan about his day with warmth and laughter. She was exceptional at this, the performance of being a good wife, a good mother, in the hours when it was convenient for her. When Dylan went to his room, she turned to me across the kitchen island, swirling her wine glass with practiced ease. "Why have you been so cold lately?" she asked. "You barely talk to me anymore." I looked at her. Really looked at her. She had changed her hair. Lost weight. Started wearing contacts instead of glasses. Small details, one by one, accumulating into a portrait I had been too willing to ignore. "Just preparing," I said quietly. "Preparing for what?" she asked, frowning. "For when you're gone." For just a second, something flashed across her face. Not guilt. Panic. Then she laughed, sharp and brittle, like glass breaking too fast to be pretty. "God, you're so dramatic. I'm not going anywhere." I didn't answer. I picked up my coffee and walked to my office, leaving her standing there with her wine and her lies. She didn't know it yet. But I had already started dismantling everything she thought was secure. She thought she was playing chess. She was moving pieces, the money, the house, the affair, all of it with calculated confidence. What she didn't realize was that the board was already his. And he was about to flip it. The next morning, while Victoria left early for what she called a client breakfast, I waited until her car turned the corner at the end of the street. Then I went to her home office. She kept personal files in the bottom drawer. Things she assumed I never looked at, because I had always been too absorbed in my lab work to pay attention to anything outside it. That was her longest-running assumption about me, and her greatest mistake. Inside the drawer, beneath a stack of marketing briefs, I found it. A medical receipt from a clinic in Scottsdale, dated 3 years ago. The procedure was listed as elective termination. 3 years ago. We had been trying for a second child. She had told me she'd had a miscarriage. I held her while she cried. I brought her soup. I told her we would try again when she was ready, that we had all the time in the world. She had looked me in the eyes and thanked me for being so understanding. There had been no miscarriage. She had made a choice, and based on the dates, based on when Blake Hendricks had joined our company, I had a very clear picture of whose child it had been. She had ended that pregnancy to maintain the facade of our marriage, to keep her access to my patents, my income, my name. And then she had cried real tears while I comforted her for a loss she had chosen. I put the documents back exactly where I found them. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected to shake. Instead, I felt something I can only describe as cold clarity. Like a chemical reaction that had been building for months, finally reaching its tipping point. That evening, Dylan asked me to help him with his science project. We built a volcano in the backyard, baking soda, vinegar, the whole spectacle. When it erupted, he shouted with pure delight, the kind only an 8-year-old can produce, and then threw his arms around my neck. "Dad, you're the smartest person I know," he said. I held him close and thought about the genetic test I had scheduled with his pediatrician. Dylan had collapsed during a soccer practice the previous month. They needed to test for a hereditary blood clotting disorder. Both parents had to be tested to map the genetic markers. It was standard medical protocol. And I already knew, somewhere in the space between intuition and evidence, what that test would reveal. Dylan looked nothing like me. The timing of Victoria's determination to have a baby, right after Blake joined the company 9 years ago, had never fully sat right. I needed proof. Not for my heart. My heart already knew. But for the courtroom. The results came back 6 days later. Dr. Phillips called me into his office alone. Victoria was at another dinner. He slid the folder across his desk. His expression was carefully neutral in the way doctors practice to cushion devastating news. "Mr. Carter, Dylan doesn't share your genetic markers. You're not his biological father." I didn't blink. "I suspected," I said quietly. The doctor looked visibly relieved he didn't have to navigate an emotional collapse. He confirmed the clotting deficiency was treatable. He mentioned I had legal options. I asked for full documentation, sealed, sent directly to my attorney. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out. 8 years of bedtime stories, of scraped knees and homework and teaching him to ride a bike, all of it built on a lie she told me the year Dylan was born. But here is what Victoria never understood about me. Biology doesn't determine love. I had raised that boy. I was his father in every way that mattered. In a courtroom, however, biology also mattered. And that DNA test was about to become the most powerful document in my lawyer's file. The paperwork went through at 9:03 in the morning on a Wednesday. By 9:15, every employee at EcoPack Solutions had an email in their inbox. Subject line, Company Transition Notice. I was in my lab, pretending to review polymer samples, while my phone buzzed with confused messages from colleagues. Victoria was in her office on the floor above, probably answering emails, maybe texting Blake. She didn't check her work inbox until 9:47. I know, because I heard the scream from 2 floors below. She tried calling me first. I didn't answer. She called her father 3 times. He didn't pick up. By 10:15 she was in the car park, pacing, phone pressed to her ear. Richard finally called her back at 10:22. She had put him on speaker, too panicked to care who overheard. I was walking to my truck. "Dad, did you see the email? He sold the company. He sold our company to Frost Industries. He can't do that." There was a long silence. I could almost feel the moment Richard Drummond pulled up the shareholder agreements and saw what he had overlooked for 7 years. "Oh, God," he whispered. And then, Barely audible, he can. The majority stake. He had transferred it to me in 2018 as collateral for a bridge loan. We were supposed to restructure. We never did. He's had controlling interest for 7 years. The patents are in his name, he licensed them to the company, but he owns them. Without Dane, Victoria, we have nothing. And now Frost has it all. And you need to see, Richard said, his voice dropping to a whisper, who he sold it to. The line went dead. Nathan Frost. The competitor Richard had publicly humiliated at an industry conference 2 years ago. The man Richard had called a fraud and a copycat in front of a room full of investors. That man now owned everything Richard had spent 40 years building. Victoria stood in the car park, phone trembling in her hand, staring at nothing. Then she saw me. 30 feet away. Standing beside my truck, close enough to have heard every word. Our eyes met. Hers were wild, desperate, searching for an explanation that could make this make sense. Mine were calm. Empty. Final. Dane, she breathed, starting toward me. What did you do? I got into my truck. Started the engine. Drove away. In the rearview mirror, I watched her grow smaller and smaller, standing alone in the car park. Exactly the way she had made me feel for the past 8 months. My phone buzzed. A message from Nathan Frost. Meeting at 2 p.m. conference room. Don't be late. I wasn't just attending that meeting. I was leading it. As senior partner of Frost Industries, the position Nathan and I had quietly negotiated over 3 months of confidential meetings, in borrowed conference rooms and over late-night coffee in neutral territory diners. My patents remained mine. I received a 30% equity stake in the merged entity, a salary that made my old one look like a graduate student stipend. Victoria kept nothing. Her VP title was eliminated. Her office was reassigned before she could finish clearing it. The all-staff meeting at 2 o'clock was exactly what Nathan promised it would be. Clear, swift, and surgical. He didn't use a microphone. He didn't need one. The slide that changed the room appeared without warning. Expense reports. Hotel charges. Restaurants. All billed to the company. All tied to Blake Hendricks' corporate card, some with Victoria's authorization signature. Company resources misused for personal affairs, Nathan said, his voice like ice. This isn't poor judgment. It's fraud. The next slide was worse. Before and after photographs. Medical expenses billed to company insurance. $47,000 in cosmetic procedures, coded as treatment for a workplace injury. There was no workplace injury, Nathan said. Just vanity and theft. The documentation has already been submitted to the Insurance Fraud Division this morning. Victoria shot to her feet. This is a witch hunt. I can, Nathan said calmly, cutting her off. And I have documentation for everything. She looked at me then. Truly looked at me, searching for the man who had always protected her, always softened the edges of the world for her. That man was gone. I met her gaze and said nothing. Sometimes silence is the sharpest possible response. 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Blake. She lied to me too, he said, sounding wrecked. Told me you were already separated. That the divorce was just waiting to finalize. I'm calling because you should know something about the money she took from your account. Most of it. She was moving it offshore. Cayman Islands. She had it all planned. File for divorce in 6 months, claim abuse, get emergency custody of Dylan, and disappear. You have proof of this? I asked. Bank statements. Emails. She kept everything on her laptop. I can get it to you. Why are you telling me this? A long pause. Because she used me. She used everyone. And I'm done being her accomplice. He hung up. 20 minutes later, the files arrived in my email. Bank transfers to Cayman accounts. Correspondence with an immigration attorney in Panama. Research into international schools. She wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to take my son and vanish from the country. I forwarded everything to Andrew with a single line: "Add this to the file." His response came in seconds: "This just became a criminal case. I'm calling the FBI." On my new desk, 3 floors up, corner view, my name on the door in clean silver lettering. Dr. Dane Carter, Senior Partner, Research and Development, sat a small package. I knew what it was before I opened it. The compass. The one Victoria had given me on our honeymoon, laughing and saying I needed to find my way back to her. Her note was inside, written in her familiar handwriting: "Please. We need to talk." I held the compass for a moment. The needle pointed north. Steady. True. Unwavering. Then I dropped it in the wastebasket. I had already mailed her mine, my own note tucked inside the box: "You were the one who got lost." I always knew where I was going. Her supervised visitation began 2 weeks later. 4 hours every Sunday, with a court-appointed social worker present, contingent on a clean drug test. The house, my house, the one I had paid $420,000 for, was returned to me after Patricia, her own mother, provided a signed affidavit and agreed to testify on my behalf. Unlike my daughter, Patricia told me on the phone, her voice clipped and controlled, "I know when to cut losses." I transferred Dylan to a new school, one where the parent network hadn't been poisoned by Victoria's version of events. On the first day, he came home and told me a boy in his class also loved dinosaurs. "Dad," he said over dinner that night, looking up at me with those bright, gap-toothed eyes, "can we build a robot this weekend?" "Absolutely, buddy," I said. "We can build anything." I meant it on every level. Some people mistake silence for surrender. They look at the quiet man in the corner, the one who doesn't argue, doesn't fight, doesn't fill the room with noise, and they think, safe. They think, manageable. They think, I can take from him without consequence. They are almost always wrong. Dane Carter spent 19 years being underestimated. By his father-in-law, who used his science to build an empire and made sure everyone knew it was his. By his wife, who wore his name and spent his money and planned her escape with the kind of systematic patience that would have been impressive if it hadn't been directed at destroying him. By the colleagues who clapped him on the shoulder at company events and quietly gave the credit to everyone but him. He let them. Not because he was weak. Because he was building. While Victoria reorganized her entire life around a future that didn't include him, while she transferred funds and filed papers and had whispered conversations in hotel rooms, Dane was reading shareholder agreements, reviewing property deeds, talking quietly to lawyers, and nurturing a business relationship with the one man who had reason to want exactly what he wanted to sell. The morning she came home smelling of someone else's perfume, he tied his son's shoes and said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say. Because he had already said everything that mattered, in legal filings, in documented evidence, in a handshake with Nathan Frost. The question she asked him over wine, "Why are you so cold? Why won't you talk to me?" was not, at its core, a question about distance. It was a woman sensing, without knowing it, that the ground beneath her feet was no longer solid. That the man she had mapped and categorized and dismissed had quietly become something she no longer recognized. When the company sale went through at 9:03 on a Wednesday morning, it wasn't revenge. It was completion. It was a chemist finishing an experiment he had been running for months, observing the reaction, documenting the results, and arriving at an outcome that was always, mathematically, inevitable. The betrayal had been layered: her affair, the stolen money, the house in her mother's name, the child she had never told him wasn't his, the offshore accounts, the escape plan she had built so carefully. Each layer worse than the last. But Dane had peeled every single one back, not with rage, not with confrontation, but with the unhurried, methodical patience of a man who trusted the process more than the outcome. What he kept, and this matters, was Dylan. Not because of biology. Despite biology. That boy was his in every way that love defines ownership: 8 years of bedtime routines, of scraped knees and dinosaur debates and baking soda volcanoes in the backyard. A DNA test told Dane what he had suspected. It didn't change a single thing about the way he felt. What it changed was the legal landscape, and in that landscape, it gave him everything he needed to make sure Dylan stayed where he belonged, with the parent who had actually been present. In the end, the compass said it all. She gave it to him on their honeymoon as a joke. He needed help finding his way back to her, she said. But Dane never needed the compass. He always knew where he was going. The needle never wavered. And neither did he. Before we close, I want to speak directly to you, because this story isn't really about a chemist or a company or a betrayal. It's about what happens when someone deeply underestimates the person they're standing next to. Here is what Dane Carter teaches us. 1. Silence is not weakness. The most powerful thing you can do when someone is hurting you is refuse to react. Reaction gives them information. Stillness builds your case. 2. Patience is its own kind of power. We live in a world that celebrates the quick response, the immediate comeback, the viral moment of someone getting someone else. But real strength is the willingness to play a longer game, to document, to prepare, to build something that can't be dismantled in a courtroom. 3. Love and biology are not the same thing. Dane raised Dylan. He showed up every morning, every scraped knee, every science project. The genetic test was a legal tool. It didn't change who he was in that child's life. Parenting is presence. Full stop. 4. The person who underestimates you is already losing. Victoria thought she knew exactly who Dane was, the quiet chemist, the background figure, the useful man she could manage. She stopped paying attention. And the moment someone stops paying attention to the person they're living with, they hand that person an enormous advantage. 5. Build something no one can take from you. The patents were in his name. The intellectual work was his. The relationships, the expertise, the reputation, all his. She could take the money. She couldn't take what he had actually built. If this story stayed with you, if something about Dane's patience, or the quiet way he moved through everything he had to carry, resonated with something in your own life, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. We tell stories here. Real human stories, about betrayal survived, about love that was real and love that wasn't, about people who chose silence over drama and came out the other side holding everything that mattered. If that's what you're here for, hit subscribe. Not as a favor to us, as a commitment to yourself to keep hearing stories that remind you, the quiet ones are always watching. The patient ones always win. And your chapter isn't finished yet. Drop a comment below. Tell me, at what moment in this story did you realize Dane was 3 steps ahead? I read every single one. Until next time. Stay still. Stay sharp. And remember, the compass needle always finds north. Never confuse a quiet person for a passive one. The people who watch carefully, build slowly, and speak rarely, they are not falling behind. They are simply waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, they are already 3 steps ahead. The Quiet Chemist.